in an experiment.
We don't know yet.
Why is light so far?
Like, it sounds so simple.
They had no idea.
But now the data speaks.
I find this not only refreshing, but at some level astounding.
Nature.
Welcome back to the Nature Podcast. This week we've got two stories for you on artificial intelligence. First, an AI that can predict your risk of future illness.
And how AI could turn you into a cheat. I'm Nick Petrichow.
And I'm Shamini Bundell. Our first AI story this week is brought to you by reporter Benjamin Thompson, and it's all about predicting the future. In this case, people's future health.
When you visit the doctor, they're likely to want to know your medical history. For a lot of conditions, what illnesses you've had before can be relevant for diagnosis and treatment. And when it comes to disease prevention, your past history can have a big impact on the risks of developing future ailments. Sometimes these links are more obvious, like incidences of high blood pressure raising the risks of a heart attack, for instance. But sometimes links between past diagnoses and future risk can be hard to see. There are often a lot of subtle interacting factors buried in a large amount of information. This is where AI could help. Looking at patterns and predicting what might come next is something AI tools already do well. And this week in Nature, a paper describes a new AI system for predicting how a person's health might change over their lifetime, based on their past health record, among other things. Now, this isn't the first health prediction system to be developed, as one of the study's authors, Moritz Gerstung, from the German Cancer Research Center, explains.
There are a great number of individual algorithms that have been developed over the past years and decades, and many very successfully so. But what is typical is that there is one tool for one disease. So there is not really a tool that does provide a very comprehensive assessment of multiple risks.
This is where Moritz's new research comes in. He and his colleagues have developed an algorithm called Delphi 2M that looks to combine a host of data to predict someone's risk of developing a whole variety of different diseases, all at the same time. This system can be input with a person's healthcare records, and the algorithm will analyse them and output the potential risk of them developing various diseases later in their life. For example, if a person was diagnosed with condition X at age 40 and Y at age 55, their likelihood of developing Z in their 70s could be increased. The system works by comparing one person's information to the huge database of health data it was trained on.
Our training data came from the UK Biobank, which is a very large research cohort, and it encompasses 500,000 participants. They have provided much information about their lifetime health evolution, from childhood diseases all the way to those happening at higher age. The typical participant is now between the age of 60 and 70, so many of them have entered now a period also with a greater disease burden.
These data were augmented with other information, such as lifestyle habits like drinking and smoking, and the algorithm uses all of these to calculate risk. At its heart, the way Delphi 2M works is analogous to the large language models that power chatbots like ChatGPT, which are trained on a huge amount of text. These systems use statistics to predict the next word in a sentence, allowing them to generate likely answers to questions. Delphi 2M works in a similar way.
When we think about understanding disease progression, a bit like in a sentence where we have a sequence of words, we have a sequence of diagnoses you can receive from a doctor. The underlying principle that they are occurring in a particular order and that the order matters for what is going to come in the future is then a very similar feature. The one difference which we effectively had to implement is that in this progression of diseases, we also need to think about time, which you don't have to think in a sentence.
And this is how Delphi 2M can take a look at a person's records and then compare it to the patterns it has made using the biobank data to come up with an estimate of risk for over 1,000 different diseases. And these words, estimate and risk, are important. This machine won't look at someone's records and say, when they hit 60, they're going to get cancer, for example.
But what this tool can do is say what the rate in, say, the coming year is likely to be. So a typical risk for getting a particular type of cancer in the next year is on the population average, about 1 in 1,000. But what the tool can then do is establish whether for a particular individual, it may be closer to 1 in 100 or maybe lower than that. So maybe only 1 in 10,000.
To put their trained model through its paces, the team tested it using 100,000 records from the UK Biobank that Delphi 2M hadn't already seen. And they compared its outputs to other health prediction systems to get a sense of how accurate it might be.
So we compared it against around half a dozen algorithms for different diseases such as diabetes or cardiovascular disease. We found that it was typically as good or just slightly better than those, which is probably because it takes in a bit more information. The one thing where it was not better was in predicting diabetes, because there an algorithm also incorporates one of the molecular markers.
Despite being trained on UK Biobank data, Delphi 2M showed similar but slightly less accurate results when tested using unrelated health data collected from almost 2 million people in Denmark. As part of their research paper, the team probed the working of the system to find out how Delphi 2M came up with the answers it did. They showed that it was clustering the co-occurrence of related conditions and that picking out these patterns and interactions was key.
It learns how temporarily cohesive these patterns are, so how sticky they are, because what we also see is that these clusters, they are very tight in the short term, but then they become less and less influential as time progresses. So there could be very acute episodes of, say, cardiovascular disease, and that then also comes with a momentarily increased risk of mortality. But those people who are recovering from it, then they essentially have risks which are then much more similar compared to the population average.
In addition to looking at how the system works, the team also investigated any biases in their training data. They note that the people whose data is included in the UK Biobank contains more white British citizens than the general population, and that participants on average are more affluent and educated. All factors that can skew levels of disease incidence, introducing biases into Delphi 2M that may limit its effectiveness. Also, there are other absences in the data that can create false patterns.
One is, for example, that the participants of the UK Biobank were alive when they entered. And that means that there were no deaths recorded before the age of the registration, which started with ages of 40 and older. But if you look at the general population, the rate of mortality, while it is low in the first 4 decades of life, it is not zero. But the algorithm now says basically it is impossible for someone to die before the age of around 40.
Reporter Gemma Conroy has been covering this story in print for Nature. She's been getting a sense of the feelings about Delphi 2M among the wider research community.
So the researchers I spoke to, they were really excited about this model because it captures so many diseases all at once, unlike other ones that only look at single diseases like your risk of diabetes and another one for your risk of cancer, etc. One researcher told me, you can think of this as your digital twin of your health, where you can ask what's likely going to happen next. There are some limitations though. They did say that we're not going to see this in the clinic anytime soon. It needs to be trained on a much broader data set that's much more representative of different types of people. So there's still some way to go.
Moritz agrees that further testing is needed using a more diverse data set to evaluate the system and its potential uses. He also says that there are a lot of other types of data that could be included to improve predictions, things like information on surgeries or prescribed drugs. Ultimately, though, Moritz hopes that Delphi 2M could one day be used to save clinicians time when assessing disease risks in a patient, perhaps during their annual checkup, but also that predictions could potentially be used more broadly at a population level.
We can use it to look at a group of say, all the inhabitants of a particular council and evaluate what is the likely disease burden within the next year, within the next 5, 10 or 20 years for healthcare planning. But we also need to know not only how high is it going to be, but which diseases will be more prevalent. Will we need more hospitals or more doctors? But what should they specialize in? Do we need oncology wards or treating cardiovascular disease or metabolic disease? And for this type of forecasting, of course, one also really needs to look at it more holistically.
That was Moritz Gerstung from the German Cancer Research Centre in Heidelberg. You also heard from reporter Gemma Conroy. To read Moritz's paper and Gemma's news story, look out for a link in the show notes.
Coming up, when AI tools aren't being used for medicine, are they eroding our morals? Before that, though, Benjamin Thompson is back with this week's research highlights.
Refugees hosted by local families integrate better into their new country than those living in other types of accommodation, new research suggests. Following the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, a team of researchers investigated the lives of Ukrainian refugees in Germany. At the time, the large influx of displaced Ukrainians into Western Europe led to programs which saw residents opening their homes to them. The researchers surveyed refugees who were matched with local families through one of these programs, as well as similar refugees who applied but were not matched. Those who were hosted by local families reported greater social and psychological integration. As a result, they were able to form more ties with residents of their host country and feel more connected with it than were those who lived in public asylum centres or privately rented homes without a host. They also showed an improved capacity to handle essential tasks, such as seeing a doctor. Refugees who reported the closest contact with their hosts were the most integrated, pointing to the value of these daily interactions. Read that research in full in Nature Human Behaviour. A battery-powered, squishy shirt can help its wearer keep their cool, even when the temperatures are heating up. Researchers created a garment covered with tile-shaped thermoelectric devices that use a voltage to create a temperature difference. When an electrical current was run through them, the side facing the wearer's skin became cold, and the side facing away from the body became hot. On the hot side of these tiles was a layer of a water-filled material called a hydrogel that, when heated, sped up evaporation while keeping the skin comfortably cool. Tested at temperatures of up to 55 degrees Celsius and at humidity levels as high as 88%, the thermoelectric devices stayed below 35.8 Celsius on their cold side for more than 6 hours. Powered by a lightweight battery pack, the cost of these garments is projected to be under $20 when mass-produced, which the authors say could make the device widely accessible and help outdoor workers in increasingly hot climates. Try that research on for size over at Cell Reports Physical Science.
Chances are you've probably used a chatbot to do a task for you. Maybe to draft an email, to help with some coding, or even to just shoot the breeze with. And while a lot has been said about the ethical concerns about using such tools, one thing you might not have thought about is how using these AIs may affect your own ethics. Well, according to a new study in Nature, AIs could be making us more likely to cheat. Reporter Julie Gould is here with more.
No matter your opinion on AI tools, one thing is obvious. They are everywhere these days, and that means that more of us will delegate tasks to them. But as we get these AIs to do things for us, we get further away from the task itself. And with that distance, it's possible that some of our normal concerns ebb away. And so a question is, might we be willing to cheat? Or, to put it another way, might we be willing to allow the AI tool to completely do something like reporting on our taxes whilst cheating on our behalf? That's what Iyad Rahman and his team from the Centre for Humans and Machines at the Max Planck Institute for Human Development have been trying to figure out.
it's possible that the task preparation software may become a bit more intelligent, may maybe process your data in a more interesting, sophisticated manner, and perhaps become a bit more creative, in helping you find ways to reduce your taxes. And some of those may be unethical.
That's Iyad. He and his team have been putting this idea of whether we'd be more likely to cheat if an AI tool is in the mix to the test. They used a well-studied experiment called the die rolling task. In this task, you, the principal, roll a die under a cup that has a small hole at the top, so only you can see the outcome of the roll. You're then to report the outcome to the experimenter and get paid accordingly.
So if you report a 6, then you might get paid more than if you reported a 5 or a 4 and so on. So this creates a temptation to cheat because you're not going to get caught. But as experimenters, we're able to observe whether people cheat in one condition more than others by simply observing the average die roll. If it's higher than expected, then we know that people are cheating. We don't know who, when exactly, but we know that on average, they cheat more.
Iyad and his team were pretty thorough with this experiment. They actually ran it 4 different ways with different kinds of AI in the mix. First, they ran the experiment as normal with no AI, where the participants self-reported their outcomes. Then they used the old school AI, where the AI hasn't learnt what to do using data or previous instructions. So the participant had to specify to the AI tool exactly what to do in each situation. The first option is to be completely honest all the time. Tell the machine to report exactly what you saw. If you saw a 1, report a 1. Saw a 2, report a 2, etc. If you want the machine to cheat all the time, you tell it to always report a 6, regardless of the outcome of the die roll. Or something in between the extremes. Maybe you want it to cheat a little bit. If the outcome is a 1, maybe report a 2. Next, they used modern AI tools. Here the participants had to give the machines data sets from which to learn. This is called supervised learning, which is the foundation of most modern AI.
We presented the participants with 3 data sets. In one data set, the previous participant always reported honestly. There was another participant that's cheated sometimes, and one participant that always reported a 6. And now you can cheat by just simply picking the data set that contains some cheating and asking the machine to learn to mimic this data set, right? To behave like this data set.
The third way of teaching AI is called unsupervised reinforcement learning, where participants or the principals just specify a goal to the machine, the agent.
And the machine tries out different approaches and basically learns what the optimal way to achieve this goal is. So all you're providing is a goal. You're not saying cheat, you're saying make me money, right? And so we gave people basically a dial, imagine a radio dial, and you can set it anywhere between report always truthfully or maximize return, maximize the revenue for me. So you're not telling it to cheat at all. You're not telling it do this by cheating, but that's the only way to do it in this case.
What they found was that even when people could specify the rules to the machine, they cheated much more than they would have had they done the tasks themselves.
If people do this task on their own, only about 5% cheat, which is kind of remarkable because we can't really point at specific individuals saying you cheated, so they can get away with it. Yet most people behave honestly in this task. But if they can tell the machine what to do by specifying the rules, then the number jumps to 25% of cheaters, which is quite substantial as a kind of effect of a behavioral intervention. But that turns out to be only the beginning, and it gets much worse after that. So if all you need to do is give the machine the data set to learn from, then you're telling the machine what to do in a more subtle manner, and then 50% of people cheat. If all you do is set the goal, now 85% of people cheat. So all these people who would have been honest otherwise are tempted to cheat, and approximately half of them cheat fully. So they set the dial to the max, which means always report a 6. So this is really remarkable that the simple act of delegating to a machine makes people cheat more, but the way in which they do this can substantially alter the extent of this cheating.
The reason for this increased level of dishonesty, Iyad believes, is an increased psychological distance between the person delegating the task and the immoral act. There are 2 components to this: the belief of the chance of being caught in the act, but also the act being attributed to the person delegating the task.
If I program the machine with rules, I say, if you observe a 1, report a 3, then I have explicitly instructed the machine to cheat in this case. But if I just say, use this data set, then I could always say, look, I didn't notice that this data set was, included some cheating. And if I just give the machine the instruction by specifying the goal to make me money. I could say, oh, I didn't know, that to make the maximum amount of money, you have to cheat. So there's plausible deniability.
In a second set of experiments, Iyad and his team wanted to know how modern large language models interpret the natural language prompts that humans give them, using normal sentences in a prompt to ask a machine to do a task on your behalf.
For example, you could say, always report truthfully, but if you're unsure, perhaps take my interest into account. So you're not really saying cheat, but you're just kind of being suggestive. That's not something we could have done with machines in the past. I think large language models have provided this new capability for machines, which kind of, mimics real life as well. Like maybe I'll get in trouble now, right? But the machines don't care. They don't have this kind of morality. They don't care about their reputation. But what we found is that machines almost fully comply.
So in a third part of the experiment, Iyad wanted to know how machines would follow these prompts compared to humans, and whether or not people delegating the tasks would ask a machine to cheat more or less than a human. What they found was that if principals asked a human agent to cheat and incentivized them to do so, only half of them would. But AI agents were much more compliant than human agents. 3 out of the 4 commercial AI agents complied 98% of the time. The other one, 79%. That's the whole premise. These are generic AI agents that complete the task asked of them, and often politely so. Those that build the large language models do put guardrails in place for critical human safety, making sure people cannot ask them how to make bombs or chemical weapons, for example. But these guardrails aren't sufficient to prevent the type of cheating observed in Iyad's research. And this raises a question for society. Whose responsibility is it to prevent this bad behaviour within the machines? Does it lie with the person setting the prompts, or with the companies creating the large language models? The team found that the guardrails that are in place in commercially available large language models are not sufficient to stop their dishonest behaviour, whether this was in the die rolling task or in a second game which mimics real life, a tax evasion game. So they asked the principals to set more specific, high-level instructions.
It turns out that the only thing that works is being very, very specific to say, in this particular task, don't over-report die rolls. That would be cheating. And then some of the models would stop complying. And the reason that this is not scalable is because then you have to specify this rule for every situation.
What does this mean for ethical behaviour from humans and machines going forward? There seems to be a trade-off between compliance and preventing them from complying with unethical instructions from humans. Iyad believes there are 3 different things for society and large language model designers to consider. The first is to build the large language models with guardrails to make them highly ethical. So if anything looks unethical, they refuse to comply. The second option would be to remind people that even though they are delegating tasks to a machine, ultimately they are still responsible for the behaviour of the machine. Delegating tasks does not absolve people from moral responsibility. April Bailey, a psychologist at the University of Edinburgh who studies people's beliefs and biases and wasn't associated with this research, believes this could be a problem for the future.
What we know from the social sciences is that on average, a lot of people will behave in an unethical way or behave in a biased way. And what we're looking at in this paper is really a systemic problem. So it needs a systemic solution. I don't think the solution is to just encourage people to be more ethical when they're interacting with these models, because that puts the onus on the individual. And we know that that's not a great long-term solution. I think that what they're moving towards in their ideas, the authors in this paper, and thinking about how to intervene on the model is the direction that we need to go, but it is a really complex one and will require collaboration with computer scientists, with ethicists across disciplines.
What it comes down to, Iyad said, was both human and machine behaviour, both of which are incredibly difficult to predict and control.
What we're doing really is to raise the alarm, to say this is something we need to think about, and that the problem of aligning AIs with good human values is really not just an alignment of machines, but also an alignment of humans, right? That we need humans to be ethical as well, and that they can be tempted. So this is a kind of a behavioral vulnerability in ethical AI.
That was Iyad Rahman from the Centre for Humans and Machines at the Max Planck Institute for Human Development in Germany. You also heard from April Bailey, who's at the University of Edinburgh here in the UK. That piece was written, narrated and produced by Julie Gould. For more on that story, check out the show notes for some links.
Finally on the show, it's time for the briefing chat, and we're going to discuss some highlights from the Nature Briefing, Nature's daily science newsletter. So, Nick, what's caught your eye this week?
So I've been reading an article in Nature about Europe's new supercomputer, and this thing is powerful. I wanted to ask you, Shamini, how many operations per second do you reckon it could do?
Oh no, don't ask me that. I don't even know what an operation is in this context, I've got to say. A million. Is it a million?
It's not a million, I'm afraid. Your laptop, in fact, can do about a trillion. It's not big enough. It's a quintillion, so a million trillion operations. So quite a lot.
Okay, so yes, pretty close. So this is a new supercomputer for all of Europe?
This is a supercomputer that was funded by Germany and the European Commission and will be able to be used by researchers within Europe. And so this computer is the fourth most powerful supercomputer. It can do the fourth most operations out of all supercomputers in the world. The biggest ones are in the US, and also China have a lot of these sort of supercomputers. And the interesting thing about this one as well is that it runs entirely on renewable energy, according to the team behind it.
Oh. And do these supercomputers need a lot of energy? Are they very energy hungry?
Yes, they are very energy hungry, but this one is actually the world's most energy efficient supercomputer. But even then, it would still use enough energy to power about 11,000 homes. That's 17 megawatts of power. So this supercomputer is called Jupiter, which you may be able to guess is an acronym for something, and it's an enjoyable acronym. It stands for the Joint Undertaking Pioneer for Innovative and Transformative Exascale Research. I'm sure they planned this acronym out from the start. I will comment no further on that.
And what kind of innovative research are we talking? So in general, what are these supercomputers used for?
Well, it may not surprise you, and it seems to be a theme of this week's show, that a lot of these supercomputers are used to build AI models. So US and China have been well ahead in the race to build bigger and better AIs, but this may be Europe's way to catch up. This computer could allow researchers to really probe the limits of what AI can do and build their own models, and apparently a large language model is already in the works, although no further details are yet able to be shared about that, but it seems like AI will be the big thing for this.
So is the idea that, like with other big sort of science facilities, that researchers would book some time or some processing power to test out whatever it is they've been working on?
That's right, yeah. So researchers will be able to apply to use the supercomputer up to twice a year. 30 projects have already been selected. So there's a few on AI, there's a few on video generation, there's a few on climate models, particle physics, energy applications, and research into drug development and things like that.
And up until now, this is something that you'd maybe have to go to China or the US to be able to do?
Yeah, so in the past, researchers would have had to go to other countries if they wanted to do some of these really computer intensive tasks. So the hope is with Jupiter that people will be able to do things that they can never do before within Europe. And, you know, that may be good if there's some sort of political instability or, you know, trade negotiations go on or anything like that. That could help ensure that European scientists are still able to do research. And one thing that researchers are planning to do is to make better weather models. So weather is a particularly tricky thing to compute. And so at the moment, weather models in Europe have models that are like the 10-kilometre scale. But Jupiter will allow these models to be at the 1-kilometre scale, so a lot more fine-grained resolution. And this could help them build a digital twin of Earth as well. So we've spoken about digital twins on the podcast before, and this could be a way of sort of basically trying out different things and seeing how the flow of air and wind across the world is, which could be great for all sorts of things, including whether or not you need a brolly.
Okay, yeah, so whether it's raining in this particular 1 square kilometre, or I guess whether there's natural disasters and weather hazards and things like that happening. Well, if my little work laptop here is struggling with some of the important audio editing and video editing we do, I'll be sure to apply for some time on the supercomputer and get my a million billion operations a minute, was it? I can't even remember the unit. A second, right, yes, that. Very important. Oh dear. Well, another very complex system. Maybe you would need a supercomputer to model this. I've been reading about some scientists studying the ways that octopuses' legs move. So 8 legs, bending, twisting in different directions. Obviously really complicated. And some scientists have been trying to sort of pin down exactly what's going on.
Before we go any further, I just want to clarify for listeners, octopuses is a plural term of octopus, as is octopodes and octopi. So don't write in.
I do like octopi. Octopi is more fun, if a little bit more of a mouthful. But yeah, this was a article that I read in the New York Times based on a paper in Scientific Reports. And the main thing that I'm getting from reading this is just how cool and flexible and amazing octopuses are. So one of the things they did was try to sort of categorize all the different things that they do and can do. And it's just so much variety. They have a little diagram of like, they've sort of divided it into the behaviors. And so you've got little pictures of octopuses. They're sitting down, they're swimming forwards, they're swimming backwards. They're just kind of like feeling around, grabbing a rock. At one point, pretending to be a rock, but sort of moving along so that they're just all bundled up, but their legs at the bottom are just like moving them along. There was a video of that as well. You know, perhaps to appear less tasty to a predator. Predators will say, I'm a moving rock. That's not interesting. But the point is that, you know, they can do a lot of different shapes and actions and eventually behaviours, you know, moving their 8 limbs in different ways.
And so they've, you know, been trying to understand all these different ways that octopuses move, whether they're like a moving rock or they're just sort of grabbing prey or anything, I guess. What were they trying to figure out from doing this? So
they were kind of building a little bit of a visual dictionary of their arm movements and doing a lot of analysing videos and categorising to try and get a sort of quantitative idea of like what octopuses were doing. And it sounds like very tedious work. So they got minute-long video clips from 25 different octopuses, and then they had to go through it frame by frame, logging what each arm was doing. So they had to watch each video clip 8 times.
Oh, crikey.
And they looked at, like individual arm actions. They had some sort of categorization of actions as well. So you've got like, is the arm bending or stretching or twisting? And then you've got, is the action a sort of curling or a grabbing or just sort of trailing along? And then you've got, is the behavior the, the kind of things I mentioned earlier, like grabbing a rock or parachute attack or having a little sit down. And they ended up with this sort of like detailed data set on what all the different arms are doing, which is kind of interesting when you're thinking about how octopuses are using all these sort of 8 limbs. And so there has been previous research into this, and quite a lot of the previous research was in the lab, so they wanted to get some natural behaviours in the natural environment of the octopuses. And one of the things that they sort of noticed, for example, was that the octopuses tend to be using their front legs and back legs for different things. I think this was a confirmation of sort of previous research that the back legs tend to be more used for locomotion and the front legs more for different kinds of actions, a wider variety of actions with their front limbs there. And previous research has suggested that octopuses might be left or right-handed. But they did not find this. They didn't find any difference between the left or right limbs from the octopus when they were out doing their stuff. It was more about which pairs of limbs they were using. So, like the front pair or the second pair or the back pair. Right.
And so understanding how octopuses move, I guess, is like fun and interesting. But what do the researchers hope this research might be used for?
Well, there is relevance for things beyond octopuses, which is soft robotics, which we've talked about on the pod and on the YouTube channel a lot before. So there's been a lot of research into, robots with soft, flexible bodies that can sort of do a wider variety of movements. So octopus is obviously a great basis for that. The amazing both variety of movements that each individual limb can do, and then there's the sort of how they coordinate all of those 8 limbs together to do a bunch of stuff. So this sort of categorization of movements and actions and behaviours. Could be the kind of basis for it if anyone out there is designing an octo robot.
Well, I look forward to seeing the octo robots of the future. But I think that's all we've got time for on this week's briefing. Listeners, if you are interested in those stories and for a link of where you can sign up to get more like them direct to your inbox, you can swim like an octopus to the show notes to get some links for them.
And that is all for this week. But if you've enjoyed this episode, do let us know. You can leave us a review or a comment on your podcast app of choice, or you can send us a message on X or Blue Sky. We're at Nature Podcast, or just send us a good old-fashioned email to podcast@nature.com. I'm Shamini Bandel.
And I'm Nick Petrichow. Thanks for listening.